All right. Welcome to Gen Area. I wonder what number I put into the room request sheet, because I think we got a very posh big room that we might not need. And I also apologize because I just realized that even though you upload an agenda as Markdown, you can't actually show it over Meet Echo if it isn't a presentation. So I have to wing it a little bit here. I know. We had a request from Stefan Wenger to see if we could move the, what was it, Jay? Which one to where? Antitrust to second. Is that okay with everybody, or would have people planned on the agenda being unbashed? Okay, if people are okay with that, then I'm thinking I'm going to do this live here. So we have 3 sessions, and we have a bunch of time at the end, so we have a little bit of slack in case the discussions get longer than we thought. There's also quite a bit. Are you guys hearing the echo too? Is it just up here with the monitors? It's only up here? Okay. It's only there, it's there as well, okay. So we have 3 topics, and this is, as you know, pretty unusual. So Gen Area doesn't usually meet, which is also explains why I don't usually chair, and Robert is giving me a sign I should get away from the microphone. Like this? Okay. I'm gonna put it here, then I can look at my slide. Typically we don't schedule Gen Area, but there were a bunch of topics that were recently dispatched through Gen Dispatch or had been submitted as BOF proposals and were rejected by the ISG at the time that required a bit more discussion time. Both for the first ones, they are drafts that were dispatched to me as the sponsoring AD, where we had mailing list discussion that made me think that an in-person chat about the contents would be good, because I think the authors of both think they are close to getting done, and we want to sort of make sure that at least the people who had opinions on the content of both of those drafts were agreeing with that assessment. And the last one is Mark Nottingham's BOF request on the ISG discuss considerations, I guess, or guidelines, and want to see, because we dispatched this last time and there wasn't a lot of time in Gen Dispatch to discuss the proposal to any depth, and so wanted to give Mark the chance to have a discussion with the community with a bit more time. Is there anything else that people want to talk about? Okay. I don't have slides about the Notewell, but you should have seen it a couple of times. So if you're participating here, there's certain policies that affect you. One is around IPR, which requires you to disclose any IPR that's relevant to a discussion you're participating in the session. You need to disclose that existence, or you mustn't participate. I would be surprised if that is an issue for us in this session, but you never know. And there's various code of conduct and rules that apply to you. So please be nice to each other and treat each other respectfully is my way to sum this up. And there's various notices about being recorded and streamed. There's all the cameras around you might pick up on that. We're putting you up on the web, and there's photographers around, and pictures of you might be taken. Okay, with that, I would go to the newly moved first presentation on the venue requirements, the revision of the IETF venue requirements RFC.
Thank you. So for those who don't know, I am Jay Daly. I'm the IETF Executive Director. For both of the things I'm doing, there has been some sort of scheduling thing that means that my co-authors are chairing other sessions. So this was originally planned for Sean Turner to be giving this one, but I'm doing this one. So that's not working. So next slide, please, Lars.
Sure.
So a brief background then. Over some time, the IETF LLC has been accumulating one or two issues with RFC 8718. And we made a pitch with a document at IETF118 Yokohama along the lines of, we would like the community to review RFC 8718 and consider these things in its review. That was taken to Gen Dispatch, and it was dispatched with this, take it to a mailing list, work on the various different things and decide whether it's going to, from there, and Lars may decide to pick it up or whether it may need to go to a working group. There were lots of other feedback given at Gen Dispatch then, the most important which one is that we cannot assume that people own umbrellas. And we removed all of the parts that the LLC can just action, because that was one of the bits of feedback. And we also removed the parts that are not well formed. The other big bit of feedback was that we didn't need to pitch this as we would like the community to review. It was just go ahead and recommend changes to those things. So this has now been reframed as a BCP to clarify 8718 and to update it and to replace 8719, that should say, not, sorry, I've used entirely different numbers for actually the same things there. So, and I'll explain that bit in a second. There are four sets of things within this draft. The first one recommends a new policy to replace RFC 8719. That's the meeting rotation policy. This is new since Gen Dispatch. This has come from feedback directly from the community and has come from the IETF chair as well about some concerns about it. So the specific concerns have been that the current meeting rotation policy doesn't distribute the pain well enough, and that it makes exploratory meetings too hard to include. The feedback that we've had is that in the most recent draft, the proposed rotation policy is too strict and not workable, so that will be withdrawn. The main issue was not to put a new policy about it in place, it was to deal with the requirement for IETF consensus for an exploratory meeting, and to make that an LLC decision for an exploratory meeting, not something that requires IETF consensus. But that was hidden inside some other text, and so I need to provide new text that then specifically addresses that point. So this point here is something that we can discuss, of course. There's no text for you to work on with that one. Next slide, please. The next bit was about hotels and facilities, and this is where we have a very specific proposal, which is to clarify what close proximity means, because there are different views, and while 8718 was intentionally written to be quite loose about this, to give the LLC flexibility, there is a notable degree of tension about that flexibility. In other words, some people do not agree that close proximity can mean a 10-minute walk. As I mentioned, you know, if you don't own an umbrella, then that can be a problem. And so this is why we're proposing a tighter definition of it. That simply just makes it clear to people that it is that this is the boundaries of what it can be. The other thing is replacing the requirement for the total room block from 1/3 of the projected attendees to a much more flexible, sufficient rooms to meet the expected demand. Because the cost of the rooms, the location of the venue, all of these things can affect the size of the room block, and the 1/3 is simply too rigid, and so we would prefer more flexibility there. And then finally, well, not quite finally, we have a lot of things in there about overflow hotels, and I just want to make it clear in that these are entirely optional feature to have overflow hotels, because currently it's pretty much a requirement that we have to have overflow hotels. But all of these bits here come down to the changing nature of the way that people are booking their accommodation. That we have more and more people who are using Airbnb or equivalent services, or going to cheaper hotels, or these type of things. And we're simply trying to have a 8718 more flexible to manage those things. Colin, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, Colin Jones. I totally agree with this. It makes sense. I was just going to comment on, I want to make sure that we don't get ourselves in a worse state with the words meet expected demand, because my recollection of our current 1/3 room blocks is they've always been insufficient to meet current demand. They've almost always filled out. No, sorry, just taking that. Okay, that's fine. What I don't want to have is somebody show up and say, the room block was full by the time I went to book, therefore you didn't meet this requirement, which I'm sure is not what you intend.
No, that's what the word expected means.
Okay.
But in recent things, we haven't met anywhere near the full size of the room block.
Perfect, thanks.
We've met the attrition level so that we haven't had a financial penalty from it, but not nowhere near the full scope. Bob, did you want to?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to add myself to the queue. Do you want comments now, or?
I don't mind.
Okay, so one issue that I run into where I work is I cannot get approval to attend the meeting until after registration opens. And it takes some particular variable amount of time to get that approval, because it goes through a bunch of people. And so I can't book the hotel until I get the approval. And I suspect there are a lot of people like this.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to, even though I may have the best intent of applying for approval, and so I don't know exactly how you fix that, but this will make it hard for people who would like to stay in the main hotel.
No, we're not going to, we don't want to max out the room block. That's not the intent.
Well, I'm not proposing a solution. I'm just saying, you used to be able to book the hotel when registration opened independently of having registered.
Yes.
This will create problems for people like me, and I suspect others. So you might.
Sorry, can you explain what will create the problems? I don't understand.
So I can't book the hotel until I get travel approval.
Yeah.
And it takes some period of time, and the hotel, the venue hotel may be sold out in that period of time.
No, the problem we have currently is significant number of underselling. We're nowhere near them being booked out, and that's because we're at the 1/3. So we don't want to reduce it down to whatever size. That means we're back to overbooking. It's just there's a gap between a comfortable level and the current even higher level that we have now. So it's just taking out that gap there. So that's why it's sufficient to meet expected demand. We are explicitly stating that we want to make sure that there is a big enough room block so that what happens to you does not, what you're worried about doesn't happen.
Okay, if it doesn't happen, then I won't worry about it. But
well, that's true. Ted?
Ted Hardy, thank you very much. I do strongly agree that making this more actionable is very valuable. I do want to note that using 10 minutes walk is in fact a little bit variable depending on how fast you walk. And for some of us, we may have no mobility issues, and this represents one distance. And those with mobility issues, it may be significantly different. So I suspect it would be valuable to put in no more than 10 minutes walk or half a kilometer or something like that, so that it's clear that we're not necessarily, one, assuming you're able to walk if you're using a chair or something else, and two, that we have some expectation that this isn't like parasangs. 10 minutes walk uphill in San Francisco versus 10 minutes walk downhill can be quite seriously different. Just add something that gives like a half a kilometer, whatever makes sense to you, so that we're not stuck then arguing over whether somebody can walk 10 minutes and achieve it in any one place.
That's fine. I will do. And let me add something which is not about what you're saying actually, but just to make absolutely certain that people understand this. The current close proximity is sufficiently loosely defined that it could mean 15 minutes walk. You know, it could mean a kilometre walk. This is about trying to narrow it down so that we have a boundary on what close proximity means, because people have different expectations of that. And adding a distance in is actually great. Thank you, Ted. I'm happy to consider that.
Thank you. And I will say, I think close proximity, when we were talking about this some time ago, was meant to include, you could step on a tram and one tram stop later be at the right place, as opposed to necessarily defining it in terms of walking at all. That the proximity was just ease of movement as opposed to specific to walking, even though the preference was for one roof. I would be okay with that personally, but I think what you've got will match community expectations. And if you go with that and add a distance, I think it'll be fun.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the last bit of this. Sorry, back a slide, please. So the other thing is about ad hoc space. So the RSC 87118 does some stuff about ad hoc space and the lounge, and it's reasonably prescriptive about this thing called the lounge and stuff. One of the things that has been quite clear in the feedback from conversations with people is that what matters is the ability for people to flow out of a working group session to an ad hoc space where they sit down and talk, you know. And so what we've done for, what we did, for example, for San Francisco is hired in furniture so that, and put it in the corridors and things, something we didn't have in Yokohama. So when you came out of the, the corridor thing in Yokohama, you had to sit on the floor. So that is something that we are well understand. And so and when we look at lounge usage and things, it's a little bit variable, and it sort of feels a bit of an old-fashioned thing to exactly specify that. So this is now updating 8718, proposing to update 1718, simply to add these two bullet points, that there's sufficient easily accessible places for people to hold ad hoc conversations, and sufficient places for people to work online on their own devices. So so that you provide those type of facilities there, and that whether that is a lounge, whether that is plenty of seating. I mean, here we have lots and lots of little nooks and crannies and things that work well, but just simply to be less prescriptive about it. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So unfiltered internet access. So the 8718 is reasonably clear about unfiltered internet access, but we have, there is the devil in the detail here. So the example I often give is New Zealand, which has filtered internet access. There is no way about it. But what it does is it uses route injection to ensure that if you attempt to visit a site that is a site that has known child sexual abuse imagery on it, then your route is redirected off to another server run by the government that looks at the URL, if it can look at the URL, and it tells you whether or not that is blocked, and it does various things about it. Okay, and it has a list of like 5,000 or something that it does. To me, it was not clear, is that filtered or not filtered? Where are the boundaries of these things? So I had a conversation with a number of people, and I asked Stephen Farrell if he would take a go at writing something that he thought would set this out in a way that would be acceptable to the community. So this is his proposed text for, with a little bit of grammatical tidying up, for a better definition of filtering. Okay. Anybody want to talk about Bob?
Hi, I guess the problem, I'm the New Zealand policy for child sexual, whatever, sounds quite reasonable, but different countries have different definitions of what's acceptable. And not exactly sure what would be allowed in other places. So
Well, that's what Stephen's attempted to define here, and it seems to me reasonably clear, you know, maybe, but you know.
Well, but I mean, so if how do we tell when you consider having a meeting in a certain country that has certain policies? How do you decide what is acceptable filtering and what is not?
I have to do that currently, still. And this is just better guidance for us to be able to make that determination. And one of the important things about here is being able to describe it clearly and transparently and publicly to the community, so that that's what that people are aware in advance of that and can challenge us if they think that we've interpreted it wrong or gone somewhere we shouldn't go with it.
Still makes me nervous.
But we still do that now. I mean, this is another thing where we are in a position where we have a black box about doing these things. You know, Australia has a degree of internet filtering. It's much less transparent than the New Zealand one. Mark may know about it, but we're going there, and there's no, you know, no big outrage about it. So this is about trying to make that clearer, because otherwise the problem is, I feel that we're being going to put in a position of making a judgment about something, which is really something the community ought to have more say in it. But we can't have, you know, a dialogue about every individual country and every individual way of doing it. So we just need a better set of guidance about it.
Right, but the problem is the outrage will happen when people show up on site, because they won't know. I have no idea what the policy is in Australia or any other place. So
the bottom sentence here actually says that we, the LLC, need to announce this to the community. So if we go to a place where we know there's filtering going on, like New Zealand, we would basically say, by the way, New Zealand, the hosting country, filters its internet in this way, and if you're participating in person, you'll be under those filtering constraints.
So that's good, but I mean, we announced we're going to Australia, and now
Because
did we do this?
No, because this is new. This is what we're proposing that we do. But we haven't, under the current policy, we don't need to explain that, and we haven't done, and that's because we haven't understood the need to.
Well, it would be a good idea to do that soon, I think.
Yes, thank you. Mark?
There's quite a few people in the queue, so make your points briefly, please.
Really? Okay.
Not just you in particular.
The sitters. Oh, that's loud. Mark Nottingham. Yeah, I think this is entirely reasonable. I think that we as the IETF need to experience the internet in its different incarnations as its users experience it, not just in a pure laboratory setting where everything is pristine. I do think that announcing to the community, well, we're going to be in country X, it has these considerations in play and then these mechanisms at work is a good idea, only if to educate folks that, hey, look, the internet works in different ways in different places, you might want to look into that. Yeah, I strongly support this.
I'm going to stand back because I know what my voice does. Pete Resnick. Unfiltered is not on the list of mandatory criteria. I feel like this document overall worries a little too much. There were 3 mandatory criteria. This ain't on it. And I like this. I think this is fine. And I think you should go ahead with it. And I think all of us should stop fretting so much about things that were in the important list, but not in the mandatory criteria list.
I understand that, but I'm not doing this for what's important and mandatory. I'm doing it for the decision making that is being put on us and the complexity around that.
And I strongly agree with you adding more information so that the LLC can
Yeah.
properly determine this. I'm
Yeah.
saying don't overthink this.
Okay, great, thank you.
David Skenazy, internet enthusiast. Really want to echo what people have said. In my mind, dropping this requirement completely seems like the most reasonable thing to do. If you want to provide a little bit of guidance, that's fine. But if you go down the rabbit hole of making it strict, you will never be able to. Free speech means a different thing everywhere.
Thank you.
Martin Duke, Google. I do like the disclosure requirement. I think that's good. But I agree with other people that, well, so I would not suggest like completely dropping this, but I would try to define a very minimum set of connectivity that we need. Like how much like porn people can watch, or whether they can watch Netflix or like reading news is maybe second order, but like we have to be able to do our work, right? So we need, like you said, email. We need to access our corporate VPNs, and Hackathon probably has some number of requirements, and we should like probably articulate those, but not worry much about what I think most governments would consider sensitive content.
So I might use some technical terms inappropriately here, just example, but what I have heard people say to me is that an alternative way of looking at this is that if you are in a country where you can get away with DNS over HTTPS, or MASK or something like that, and you can establish a VPN connection, then that's all that matters, okay? So that you can have a fully encrypted path out and, not a non-observable path out.
Yeah.
We did discuss that with a number of people about these type of things, and there was a view that that was simply too complex and difficult a thing for people to have to manage and do in that type of way. Now, beyond that rather narrow definition, I don't know how we can define what is a minimum set. If you want to take a go at it, please do. But
Yep.
That it's.
Yeah, I mean, like, I sympathize with the difficulty of this, and I would love to talk to some hackathon people. But like, for an example, and maybe it ends up converging on Stephen's language, so maybe my comment is a no-op. But like, I mean, it seems like being able to access a mass server is important, not because like I can use it to read news, but because like we're going to have a mask in the hackathon, and like I'm going to have a server on my device back in Seattle that people need to be able to access to test interoperability. That's like fundamental to our work.
Yeah. So
I think so. I mean, maybe that collapses on what he said here. I guess I should think about it and maybe talk to like Charles or something about hackathon requirements, and I think that's probably the long pole in the tent. But yes, VPN and email certainly is important for obvious reasons.
thank you.
Colin Jennings. I largely agree with all of this. I'm going to make a comment which I'm sure will be in the rough, but I do not think that we should narrowly scope this to just the facility network and the IETF hotels networks. I should just be the network in the country. And the reason why is often those policies we put in place, you're violating the law in the country if you access outside of whatever filtering has already been mandated in the country. So I think it is a very strong mistake for us to have a separate filtering policy that we use inside our facilities versus what is used in the rest of the country. I think that's a mistake and puts people at risk. And this goes exactly to Mark Nottingham's comment of we should experience what it is to be in that country. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think we should be in countries that have all of these things. That's fine. I just don't think we should try and scope it to the facilities network. It should just be the network.
Thanks, Colin.
Does that make sense?
The current document scopes it to this, which is why I haven't attempted to go beyond that.
We're
so.
updating the current
Yeah,
document,
yeah.
but yeah. So yeah. I mean, as I said, expect to be somewhat in the rough on that comment, but there's my 2 cents.
Hi, I'm Bob Hinton, somewhat different topic. I read through the document, and I can't tell from the current document whether we would always have IPv6 on the IETF networks. And that's very important to me and many other IETFers. So
I believe that's actually part of the mandatory stuff. I don't remember. It is, yeah.
Well,
it's clearly written out a number of places.
it's not in this document anyway. I did that.
This one, no, that's because it doesn't need updating in the draft that Sean and I have produced because it's already in 8718.
Okay.
Hi, Roman Danilio as an individual. I read some of this language and I don't know how to craft it, but I'm wondering whether it captures, when you talk about VPN websites and email, the ability for folks to actually connect back to their corporate kind of sponsors that make the participation of many of us kind of possible here. So for example, I could read VPNs in a lot of different ways. That could mean a personal VPN I kind of provision versus kind of a corporate VPN. And I'm thinking the difference in kind of policies that different companies have. So I would love to capture the ability that I can have the actual ability to connect back to my corporate resources from every place we visit.
So that would mean that the first sentence after affect the ability of meeting attendees would need to include, as well as participate in the meeting and can do their normal day-to-day work as well.
I would like to see something like that, primarily because all the survey data I said that I've seen is that most participants come here as sponsored by, by some employer, and
Right.
I would find it shocking that folks don't need to somehow be tethered back to their employer while they're here.
Okay, thank you.
Roman, what's the IP address of your VPN concentrator and how does anybody know if they can connect to it, right? Like, I think that this is generally, we should go places that people think they can get work done. Here's some like protection to the people making the decision, move on. Having you should be able to connect to your corporate VPN. Oh, I can't figure out if I can connect to your corporate VPN until we go there. There's a lot of like subtlety and detail.
8178, 8718.
I-
That document already says what you want.
Yeah.
This is an addition. This is not a subtraction from the existing document, which already says business access to your corporate and business stuff. It's already in the document, already there. This doesn't change that. And Drew corrected me, unfiltered is included in the mandatory criteria by reference. So yes, this is absolutely needed. Sorry, didn't mean to divert you.
Okay, thank you. Good. Right, next slide then, please.
I think that was your last slide.
Oh, it's my last slide, was it? Excellent.
Or my browser's broken, one of the two.
No, I think that's my last slide then. Good.
Did you get what you wanted out
Yes, I
of this?
did.
Well, Pete makes his way to the
Absolutely.
microphone.
There is one thing I just want to address briefly.
I forgot one at the beginning. I wasn't sure whether you wanted questions in the middle, which is the 111 star criteria business.
Yes.
I think it was mentioned on the list, but you haven't made any updates to the document since then. I think it may be a little over-constrained, especially with regard to like you have no more than two in a row and things like that.
I'm not sure if you, on that slide, I made it clear that we're taking out.
You're taking it.
Taking
Thank
out.
you. I
The
did
only
miss
text
that.
is the only text that we're going to come back with is text that changes the process for agreeing an exploratory meeting from one that requires IETF consensus, as judged by the chair, to one that the LLC can decide independently.
Perfect.
Right?
Sorry.
And explain the reasoning for that, which is that it is simply too high a bar, for doing those things. Okay. The reason for adding the policy was so that people didn't think we'd be doing exploratory meetings regularly too often or breaking the normal meeting cycle by doing it. But as I can see, that's excessive. Right. Okay. So the final thing, we've had some sort of off-list bit that this is like that having the LLC do this sort of stuff is perhaps not the right way around. It should be the community doing this. But just to note that we tried that at Yokohama, said community, please do this. The answer was no, LLC, go do this, which is why, we're up here doing this. So just to remind people about that. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks. So I guess the plan would be to see an update to this document.
Yep.
We would then discuss it on, is it admin discuss? Were you having a discussion?
No, meeting venue.
Meeting venue. Okay, we have a
Discussing this,
specialized list. Based on that discussion, we would see if the community feels we are ready to go to last call on it.
Your
Right.
Your decision.
So I would see whether the community is ready to go to last call on it. But update plus discussion is the next steps. Martin.
Yeah, just a brief question. So is there such a thing as working group last call in this context, or does it go straight to IETF last call?
Well, there's no working group, so it wouldn't be a working group last call. I would still want to see some indication of positivity of the people who participated in the discussion so far before I go to last call.
So mailing list, last call.
Yeah, like,
Okay.
because people have been commenting on this, so thank you very much for that. And we want to make sure that those of you who have commented feel that their comments are addressed. And yeah, we could do this during IETF last call, but I feel better if we go into that thinking that we have addressed at least what we know we should have addressed. Thank you. So that was the first topic that we had from the LLC. The next one, I always want to hit the leave room button, and it's not the one I need to hit here. So I need to hit the close deck button. The next one is an update on the current state of the antitrust document, which again, you're giving it because Joel can't be here. And I think Stefan also hasn't made it yet, but maybe he'll wander in.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Next slide, please.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Right. So the background here again is that in 2020, some concerns were raised by our parent organisation, Internet Society, about the IETF's legal exposure to antitrust issues. The LLC took extensive legal advice, by which I mean that we already have in-house lawyers who are standards development organisation specialists, and we also used our litigation firm and had their antitrust litigators get involved as well, so that we could get a really very broad set of legal advice. The Internet Society also took legal advice and took external legal advice as well, and we had a meeting with the most extraordinary hourly rate cost of several lawyers all at once discussing these things. Okay, what came out of that, and I've shared some of this on list at the time, and I think I blogged it as well, is that the current policy set of the IETF provides strong mitigation of antitrust risk, and there is no requirement for a new policy on this. However, we don't have anything that is labeled antitrust that people can point to and say, right, this is our actual official explanation of how our policy set does this, nor do we have any guidance for participants that would be useful for them to understand, on a personal basis. And it would be helpful to have that document. So, the view of the litigators was not necessary, should we ever be, in a litigation position, but helpful. And the other thing was that ultimately, of course, no IETF document can provide legal advice to participants. It's simply providing, helpful information for people. Now, there was a BOF about this in 2013. As Joel would like me to remind people, the 2013, a BOF is not decision-making, but the outcome of that BOF was to have an informational document, and this is consistent with that 2013 BOF. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So we have an AD-sponsored informational internet draft. It has a background and a summary of a current policy set, and that part of it appears to have rough consensus, as in nobody's moaning about it. There are multiple small format changes recommended and to be applied. Section 4.1, which we'll come to, is to be bulleted. There is disagreement about the sort of advice, non-legal advice section of it. Section 4.1, topics to avoid, and section 4.2, topics requiring caution. When you look at the concerns that people have, there are two meta considerations here. One is how these points might be weaponized by IETF participants. That's one of the biggest concerns that people have, is that they will be used to stifle what is entirely legal, what is entirely normal discussions about things. And the second one is that the points need to be really clear so that they mean the same thing to all readers. I don't know about you, but throughout my life of writing things, I'm always surprised that people would not understand what I've written really clearly, yeah, for some reason I need to, try harder. So those are the two things that are the two main meta issues. Next slide, please. Right, so sticking points and proposed solutions about these. So under 4.2, topics requiring caution, we have the current text, which is using detailed market data, blah, blah, blah. The bits in bold are the bits that people are unhappy about. But detailed is not the point here about using market data. It's about whether or not that is public market data or not. If it's public market data, it's entirely appropriate to have a discussion about it. If it's private market data, that's where the significant antitrust risk is. The other thing is that it is, the other bit of feedback was that 2 technical alternatives is too narrow. There might be many more than that. And the other bit of feedback was that market data is unclear. Does it include technical performance data? Now, on that last point, there were a number of the lawyers said, yes, of course it does. So that needs to be potentially clarified at some point, but that's not considered a substantive concern about this text. So the proposal then is to change that current bullet point from using detailed market data to using unpublished market data and just say alternative technical proposals instead of 2 technical proposals. Martin.
Martin Duke, I guess, I mean, if we consider market data on like a mailing list or in the minutes of a meeting, like doesn't that make it published market data?
Yes. Yep.
So then like what does this mean to say using unpublished market data?
Somebody's saying, because of this data I am not telling you about, or I am not sharing with you, you must do this or you must do that.
Okay, so like if somebody gets up at the mic and says that,
No, so say somebody basically said evaluate relative implementation costs. Okay.
Yeah.
So if somebody says, you know, the implementation of cost thing of this is, you know, wildly different from that one, and I've used data I cannot share to do that with you, that's inappropriate. But if they said, I've done that using this data that is available or data I'm now sharing with you now, that is fine.
So are the chairs supposed to say like the jury should disregard this evidence?
Yes.
Okay.
But they do currently. There's no, you know, that is what our currently policy set and stuff says about this is just making it clear to people, they understand that.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else on this one? Yeah. Thanks.
Ted Hardy, I am not a lawyer. I am definitely not the IETF's lawyer, and I'm not even Cisco's lawyer. So take this as a completely unfounded statement. I believe market data remains relatively undefined. And if we take it as it might mean anything, one of the serious problems that this raises is if I say it would take too long for me to update the internal implementation we have for this. So if the working group makes this change, I won't be able to support the standard. I can't show you the internals of my implementation in all likelihood because they're probably in proprietary code, and that causes this to be a problem. So I would prefer, I realize this is just one of caution, that if we're going to use market data, that we give a citation to some well-known definition of what market data means, or we provide more guidance that implementation complexity is still permitted as a discriminator between 2 different technical proposals,
So
even if it is data where the particulars of the implementation cannot be disclosed.
okay, so two things there. As I understand from the lawyers, that is the appropriate phrase to use without citation and stuff. Okay. But it may be, but I will take that back to get that advice, you know, to explore that more. But it may be actually better to tackle this by being explicitly clear that what you are talking about is not market data, because how our internal processes work is not market data. You know, that market data is about the the stuff that is out, that is external, not internal by definition.
Okay, if the lawyers have already given you guidance that market data is a term of art in this case that will be well understood,
Yeah.
I'm happy to remind you that I'm not a lawyer. I didn't know
that's
that.
fine, yeah.
The only concern I have is it kind of relates back to what you said before. We don't want people to be able to weaponize this.
Yes, absolutely.
And,
No,
and
I
so
understand that.
if,
Yeah.
as long as it's clear in this, either the document or in this context to the community, that implementation complexity can still be something you talk about because it is not included in this market data. That solves the problem.
That's fine, and that's something I will need to raise with the others, see how that can be incorporated. That's fine. Yeah. Just as a general point, I very much understand the weaponization threat here, and so we in the latest version of this removed every use of a word that could be mistaken as an ROC 2119 word. Okay, and just use alternative English so that they're to reduce the weaponization possibility here. So we'll get that. Mark.
Mark Nottingham, now finding the correct distance from the microphone. I have great sympathy. We're going through the same sort of process in the W3C in refining our antitrust policy and competition law policy. And what I'd observe, I think Ted was a good example of this, or his comments rather. I'm not trying to make you an example, Ted. That engineers come to these discussions expecting very clear rules that they can look at in isolation and derive, how I should behave. And the lawyers, in my experience, are approaching this as well. Competition law is hideously complex and contextual, both in the jurisdiction and point in time and the specific situation. Therefore, the best we can do is give very general and expansive guidelines to avoid problem areas based on case law and so forth and so on, knowing that everything is going to be in the particulars. And they're not intending this to be interpreted as a set of rules to be followed in that sense. And I think that mismatch is probably a lot of the discomfort you're seeing in the community.
I would frame it slightly differently. If we were to give policy stuff, okay, then the lawyers would want that to be at a level that others would think would be weaponizable and would stifle conversation and other things.
Yes.
Because they would have to go to that level to provide the legal assurance about it.
Right.
So yeah.
But they're not trying to provide legal assurance. I mean, really, this is almost a performative task. It's to show, look, the IETF has thought about antitrust and competition law, and we have a document that's not quite a policy, but it has some policy flavors to it. And I think maybe getting more of that context into the document, or setting expectations from the technical readers about how they should use the document might be helpful. And in addition to the point of weaponization, the only other thing I'd bring up is that anything that looks even vaguely like it would require or create an expectation that a working group chair or an IETF chair or anyone else or an LLC staff member is making a decision about competition law, please avoid that.
No, that is well avoided in there.
Good.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay, thank you. I think next slide, please. Thank you. So the next one is about topics requiring caution. We have this current bullet point, entering into group negotiations of IPR terms. The concerns are that this is too open to interpretation and will be misused to suppress legitimate discussion. That there are many examples of where group negotiations are appropriate, which is linked to the first point. A suggestion to remove it altogether, and a suggestion to move it from the topics requiring caution to the topics to avoid. Based on the various different feedback that we've had, the proposed text is entering into private or potentially discriminatory group negotiations of IPR terms. So basically, if it's done in public on the list, that's fine. If it is a small group of people doing it, that is where it gets problematic, and that type of way, okay? Stefan, yes, marvelous. Glad you're able to join us.
Oh, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Yeah. So sorry for not being there. So the this thing with private, I already sent this as a private comment to the authors. The main issue I have with that is that the IETF shouldn't be in the business to give advice of stuff that happens outside of the official IETF meeting settings. Yeah. So if people consider it, for whatever reason, consider it the right thing to do to entertain in private potentially discriminatory discussion and negotiation of IPR terms, that's their business. That's not our business. So remove this private stuff. That's my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. So this is a difficult one in terms of the views that different people have about this being a venue where people can do naughty antitrust things in the corridors. You know, the view from our antitrust litigation lawyers was we really have very, very little risk from that. Okay, that you know that what we create here is not making us culpable for people doing that kind of thing in that type of environment. This, though, was an area where, to be blunt, the ISOC concern was still quite strong, and so we were attempting to deal with the ISOC concern about this. You know, that specific thing about what happens in the nooks and crannies there. Okay, so I understand Stefan's point of view about that. I will just need to discuss this with my fellow authors and things to decide where we go about this. But if anybody has any other views, please do step up to the microphone, even if you're not a lawyer. Very much welcome.
So I mean, Stefan's in the queue, and I would want to actually ask him whether he thinks this is a sticking point for him, but whether he could be in the rough on this but still carry forward the rest of the document, or whether this is something that would basically be a showstopper for him.
That went to me, right?
Yes.
Okay. I don't like to be in the rough, but yes, this is a bit of a sticking point. To be frank, even if this private is removed, I'm still a little bit worried about this. I'm really sorry. The original draft that came out on this subject came out during my vacation time, and there was immediate discussion about one point, and I jumped into that and completely forgot about mentioning this one. So I have to do it now. I'm sorry for that. So the issue I have generally with this point is again what was called weaponization here. It's very, very easy to weaponize discussion, even if you ignore the private. It's very easy to weaponize the term and implied recommendation against entering potential discriminatory group negotiations on IPR terms. Yeah, because what say an organization that makes money primarily out of patent licensing thinks may be discriminatory against them is very different what, say, an open source advocate would consider discriminatory. Yeah. So as long as this sits in a topic required caution, I can live with this. Yeah, as long as this private is taken out. The private just doesn't make sense to me.
Stefan, just to say that discriminatory was meant to be about discriminating on who is allowed to partake of that, not about the output on it. So clearly that text is not good enough because it doesn't make that clear.
With the word limited attendance.
But even the partaking part, sorry, Lars, go ahead.
I was like, with the term limited attendance.
Just let me jump in here for a second. I think I can get at the heart of the confusion of this. And I think this was written by some lawyers who aren't in the room. And okay. Oh, sorry. You had me going there, Murray. So Cullen James can hear. So look, I totally agree with Stephen's point that things that happen outside of the IETF process and the IETF stand SDO, we're not saying anything about here, but I don't think that's what private means here. We have a lot of discussions at IETF that are private. They're not on a public mailing list. This happens with appeals. This happens with various other on things. And I think that private in this context, and you can probably wordsmith with the lawyers to make this clear, refers to conversations that are within the IETF context, but are private. They're not public IETF meetings like this one right here is. And I'm guessing that that's actually the thing. And I'm on the same page with Stephen on things that are outside the IETF. This has nothing to do with, right?
Perfect. So you mean also something like a design team?
Wow, that's a great question. And I think your antitrust lawyers, are, when they find out about the existence of design teams, are going to tell you that they put your whole standards process at risk, and you should never have them.
we went through extensive discussion about design teams with antitrust lawyers.
Yeah.
But if a design team were to get into group negotiation of IPR terms, that's the issue, you know.
Perfect. Okay, so I think you've got this well covered. But my guess, Stephen, I'm guessing that when you clarify that what private is within the context of IETF here and give the design team example or whatever, that I suspect you might make everybody happy simultaneously.
I can't speak for my other authors, but I like that framing of it. Thank you.
That's my guess.
I would be happy enough. I would be happy enough with us. Thank you.
Great.
Okay,
thank you,
thanks.
Stefan. Thank you both.
Philip.
Yeah, I've been following this discussion for quite a while because I raised some specific IPR antitrust issues. Seems that the focus here is there are two separate issues. One is protecting the IETF from antitrust action, and the second is protecting the process from antitrust interventions. And the reason I originally raised the concerns was a specific issue in another organization where a where a representative of a participant with significant market power came out and said, if you provide that service to other parties, we will destroy you. As in, we will put you out of business. We will take your routes out of our browser and you will no longer be in business. And I had to go back and talk to management at the company making the threat, pointing out that they had better unmake that threat damn pronto, or they were going to be finding themselves in antitrust litigation. But I think that we have to have a concern so that there is a statement somewhere that says you shall not make threats of that sort so they don't actually get made in the first place. Because otherwise, whether or not somebody can sue the IETF for people playing dirty pool doesn't help if they're destroying IETF, destroying the spirit and so on by playing dirty pool.
Thanks. So that is already covered by our existing BCP set somewhere, okay? Our policy set. I don't know where. I will have to phone Brian Carpenter, okay? But it is already covered somewhere in there. This is simply assuring people that those things are covered.
I think I'm next in queue, but Philip is still showing some.
Yeah,
Can someone confirm? Okay, so Ted Hardy's still not a lawyer despite Murray pointing at me accusingly. I agree with Stefan and Cullen that one of the things this document should say, and say clearly, is that the parts of the standards process which are not completely transparent must avoid this behavior in order to both maintain the value of the standards process and to avoid any issues with antitrust. So I think that's very clear. I think what's not quite as clear to me, and going back to what Mark Nottingham was saying, lawyers are talking to you about risk. They're not talking to you in bright terms of absolutes. There's a question that comes up when the IETF provides a facility that's then used for something that's not actually kosher according to these rules. And I think the question then is what counts as the IETF providing the facility? So if there's a risk to us because we make side meeting rooms available that can be for closed discussion of this type, then that may be risk level alpha according to the lawyers. And if we do something that says, hey, IPR discussions take place in this must be open room, that may be risk level omega. I don't really know what that is. And I think what we want to do here is remind people that the use of IETF facilities does not represent the IETF endorsing what's happening in them, just like we do with side meetings in general, right? That these are not at the IETF or under the IETF process, despite the fact that they share a hotel and can book the room through us.
All side meetings in rooms that we make available must be public.
Okay.
So the risk is here. So I've seen people squat on, for example, the IAB office, which is lightly booked, right? So it's a room that we rent from the hotel and people can just like walk in and have a meeting. I think that is risk level wise probably something like they could just walk into a room without the IETF having booked it.
So we went through this in some detail with our lawyers.
Okay.
And the risk to us from being considered a facilitator is sufficiently close to zero that we do not need to worry about it.
Okay.
Okay. You know, the risk for having a process that, you know, that does not say you're not allowed to do these things that's fine. You know, once we have a policy that says you mustn't do these things, which we do elsewhere, which is not this, that's all that matters. That's fine.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. Yeah.
Simon.
Great. Thank you.
You have two people in the queue still.
Oh, right. Right.
Hi, I am Simon Hicks. I have an extensive involvement in ETSI and from 3GPP. And from that, you'll summarize that it's obviously a very heavy IPR environment. And there's a lot of money and a lot of litigation potentially floating around. So the general premise that we adopt there is that there are absolutely no IPR discussions connected with the meeting. And the rules actually say there is no IPR discussion whatsoever in the meeting. Obviously, of course, that doesn't actually stop people having private discussions per se, but it does try and limit the firm litigation potential against the STO itself. Even so, ETSI and 3GPP have been drawn into litigation, and it's cost them many hundreds of thousands of pounds, even though there was no case to answer, as those of you who are involved in the American legal system will be aware. So, I mean, perhaps here, because we don't really have much IPR floating around, we judge the potential is lower, but maybe we should consider that sort of course of action in saying that no IPR discussions whatsoever take place in IETF meetings or facilities, and then if they do, it's coincidental, but at least the IETF as an organisation has tried to protect itself against being involved in any future IPR litigation.
So thank you, Simon. Two things. First of all, the discussions of IPR are a necessary part of the IETF process, and there is a very clear document or set of documents about how those are necessary and apply to it. I had, you know, the room full of lawyers look at these specific cases, and in each case there was very good reason as to why that is not related to us, that was a particular specific thing that was done within those other SDOs that we don't do that created that vulnerability there for those things. So I understand the concern there, but first of all, in this process, we can't go back to undo the IPR rules. And secondly, I don't think you would get very far with that if you were to try, but you know, yeah.
No problem.
Okay, thank you.
Mark.
Hi, Mark Nottingham again. I came to the mic because I found myself in the surprising state of someone agreeing with PHP. You know, this document is and I think I've said this before in email, you know, all the anti-cartel stuff in the document is all based on current experience in competition law. All of the IPR-related abuse of dominance stuff there's a lot of, you know, water under that bridge, and we as a community and the legal community, you know, both kind of know how to deal with that. But all of the current actions that you're hearing about in competition law are around non-IPR forms of abuse of dominance. And I think we may do well to start thinking, and maybe it won't be reflected very much in this document, but we would do well to start thinking about what is our role in non-IPR forms of abuse of dominance. When somebody stands up and says, well, I'm dominant in this market and I'm gonna, you know, not let you do that, for example. And I suspect the answer lies in finding those other parts of our process that make us resistant to those forms of abuse of dominance and highlighting those and connecting them with things like the open stand principles.
Thank you, Mark. I think, as you know, the abuse of a dominant position exists in European competition law, but doesn't really exist in US competition law. And whereas US competition law is very much focused on cartels, antitrust elements there. So we've had a number of goes at attempting to see what could be incorporated about that, and that's at the point at which the conversation has fallen apart. So I don't think that is something we can do through this process and this document. I think if that is to be addressed, it needs to be addressed in a broader context, you know, through a different process. And my own personal view is that that would somehow have to relate to the current safeguards that we have in place to prevent capture as well, you know, such as the non-com thing about the number of people from a related set of organizations and other things as well. Okay, thank you. Do I have anyone else in the queue?
Stefan is still there. Stefan?
Yeah, I will just in response to Mark say that I think it's not entirely true that on current problems SDOs have in the context of competition law are not IP related. I mean, I just have to mention the recent decision of the European Commission not to pursue the Alliance for Open Media type of conduct as a competition issue. That's squarely in the face of IP. So I just because there was relative quiet around this particular topic over the last say 5 years plus minus this one case, doesn't mean it's out of the world. It's not. It's still right there, and it will come back and bring friends. I'm very sure about that, unfortunately. So I think we should address this point here first before we go into something broader and more difficult. Thank you.
Just to respond to that very briefly, I think you misunderstood what I said, but I don't think it's worth going too deep into this right now.
Okay, thank you. Is that Q?
That is the queue.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have another slide or not. Can we see if I do?
I don't think you do.
Yay, great. Thank you. Any final things? I'm done.
I think next steps are probably similar to the previous document where we think we might be close. So we're going to get a revision based on a discussion here. And we're going to take a discussion to the antitrust policy mailing list.
Yes.
To see if the people who have been commenting agree that that I should be taking it forward to last call, and then we'll do last call.
Yeah. And if we don't get agreement through that list, then the plan of the authors is then to basically have an interim Genaria session where we could try to get all the people in the room, because the big issue here has been, you know, conflicts and things, so that we have a number of people who have commented on the list who can't make it here. That would be, you know, if we can't get a resolution, if that's okay with you. So
let's try hard to not need an interim.
No. Yeah, okay. Yes, virtual interim. Oh yeah, no, not an in-person interim. No, a virtual one if that's the case. Right. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Jay. Right. So we're 10 minutes over, but we had a little slack time at the end. Next up is Mark Nottingham with a continuation of the discussion that happened at the last Gen Dispatch meeting about this proposal to put the ISG discussed guidelines under community control. I think that's my way of summarizing this. And let me figure out if I can find your slides.
I am in the pink box. What's a pink X now? So.
Here they are.
So at the last IETF, there were some hallway discussions, and I very hurriedly put together a draft and requested time in Gen Dispatch. And we only had a little bit of time to talk about it at the end of the session. So I requested a BOF to kind of further that discussion, and the ISG chose not to approve that, but instead we have this time. And we wanted to talk about IESG balloting and the discussed criteria that they use. So next slide. And so the heart of all of this, I just want to go very quickly through the process basis of what we're talking about. RC 2026, section 612, this is the basis of the ISG approving documents. They'll determine whether or not a specification submitted to it satisfies applicable criteria for the recommended action, and shall determine whether or not the technical quality and clarity of the specification is consistent with the expected for the maturity level to which the specification is recommended. So, notice words here: technical quality, clarity. These are the criteria that they're talking about, in addition to, next slide, the specific criteria for the maturity level that's being requested. And so this is proposed standard, which I think is representative of a lot of the work that we do here. And proposed standard, you're looking at words like stable, resolve known design choices, it's believed to be well understood, receives significant community review, and appears to enjoy enough community interest to be considered valuable. No known technical emissions. So these are, the basis of what we're looking to the ISG to use as criteria when it's making its decisions about whether to approve a document. Next slide. So yes, in summary, those are the kinds of words that are used. These are the basis. Next slide. And so the ISG, the actual procedures they use to make those decisions is not specified in 2026. So they created a balloting procedure, and they describe a couple of different ways to use it. I'm not going to go deep into the details of it, but this is the basis of actually how they make those decisions. Next slide. And so part of that is the idea of a discuss and what a discuss can mean. I think most people here are familiar with what a discuss is. I'm not going to go into the details here. Next slide. And to further refine how this is used, they published originally, I think, 2003, 2004 timeframe, and then revised in 2014. I'm sure I'm going to be corrected many times during this presentation.
Well, it's on the slide. That's the only reason I know.
Yeah. Well, no, that. Oh, you're right at the bottom. 2007. Thank you. I also, reading comprehension has always been a challenge. Thank you. And these are the specific, criteria of what is appropriate to use the discuss mechanism for and what it is not. So next slide. And again, this was formed by the ISG. And this is indeed an eye chart. I'm not going to go through this, but it's a very reasonable set of, well, these things are appropriate to use. I think I had a revision that highlighted some things, but that's obviously not been uploaded. Many of these, if not almost all of these, are connected to those criteria we talked about in 2026. Next slide. And the document also contains non-criteria, things that are out of that scope. And again, if you take the trouble to read through this, it's quite sensible. Next slide. That's all the eye charts. There's also a position called abstain, which interestingly has two different meanings. I cannot support sending this document forward, but there's two reasons given for that. One is I'm so strongly opposed that I'm unwilling to discuss. So you're effectively putting your foot in the ground. And the other is I oppose this document, but I understand that others differ, and I'm not going to stand in the way. So there's a little bit of conflict there, because it can mean either I feel incredibly strongly about this and I'm setting a bar that needs to be exceeded, or what I think I've seen in many cases has been called a non-blocking abstain, which is kind of an informal instrument that says, I'm kind of cool with this, but kind of not, so I'm just going to say abstain. And I actually spent some time looking through all of the different discusses and abstains in the last 5 years, and this is used very inconsistently. Next slide. And then there's a piece of text. Martin, do you want to talk now or later?
Just a brief comment. So I actually have a third reason for you. Okay, I have a third reason for it, doing abstain, which is like, I really don't like this document, but I have no discuss criteria that expresses my disdain for it.
Well, thank you for
FYI.
illustrating the reason why we're having this session.
Okay.
Thank you very much. That's incredibly topical. Next slide. So there's guidance in the document as well about saying no to a document. And this walks through, generally, if you want to say no, you use the abstain, and apparently that's the first kind of abstain, I think. But sometimes you really, really want to say no, and so you use a discuss. And that is a blocking discuss. It's from what I can tell in the text in the document, a discuss that you never want to remove. And that was done to me once, by the way. And this is called a backstop function of the IESG, which is really interesting because that's not referred to in 2026. And so the nature of that backstop is a little bit unexplored here. Next slide.
So,
I know you've got comments, Lars.
So I want to refer you back to the term technical omission.
Okay. And so in general, if you look at a really high level, you've got the criteria in 2026 and then the balloting criteria. And I would characterize the 2026 as generally objective criteria. It's talking about things like technical quality and clarity and lack of technical emissions. And yes, each of those is somewhat a judgment call, but they are more objective than phrases that are used in the balloting criteria like good conscience or believes. And I think there's a little bit of a division there. So next slide. And so when I was thinking about this, I think the problem statement that I'd currently characterize here is that the discuss criteria are treated as an authoritative document. But they're not grounded in community consensus. They were created by the IESG. And I'm sure that there was a degree of consultation in that process. But there's not an opportunity for the community to reopen that discussion and to say, well, let's evolve these, or we have issues. And because the community is held to these criteria, because they're seen as authoritative, the work is potentially subject to criteria that are outside the community's direct control. And so from a very, very high level, this has impacts on the IETF's legitimacy and due process. It's hard to say that this is we have due process if there are parts of it that are opaque or out of the community's control. Next slide. Do you want to talk now, Colin?
Yeah, I just want to comment on that one a little bit.
Sure.
As I was there and said, I think that everybody would agree that if something was done claiming it was a discuss criteria, but anyone felt that it did not meet the requirements of 2026, you could instantly appeal it on those grounds because 2026 is the thing. And the discuss criteria were designed to greatly limit the power of the IESG from what had been available in 2026 by itself. And they, I think, are largely today are a voluntary statement made by individual ADs that they're willing to be bound by the discuss criteria to sort of further get that. So I just want to get that. I don't want to make it sound like the discuss criteria allow the IESG to block things that 2026 wouldn't allow them to block, because I don't think that's the case. And if we disagree there, we should make sure we're on the same page before we go forward.
So I think it's really interesting how you put that, because while it's true that if I am very aware of the process and confident in my position in the IETF, I can point that out and make that appeal. It doesn't happen. Most people don't have the awareness, and I think especially new authors and people who aren't, frankly, the people in this room, don't have that awareness that the discuss criteria have a different characteristic than 2026, and that they can appeal based on 2026. And you look at that, if you compare the actual discusses and abstains that are made in the record, which is interestingly very hard to extract, yay Python, then you start seeing a mismatch. And if you look at the appeals that we've had over the last 5-10 years, that process is not well exercised. So I don't know that that's healthy.
I agree it's not understood, and agree not exercised. And so you're saying, and you're looking at the last 5 years worth of discusses, you think there's ones there that would not be allowed under 2026 and were claimed under discussed criteria. That's fascinating. I would love to see that list and discuss with NOMCOM. Thanks.
Well, and I think that would be very interesting to have that exercise. Yeah, I have very rough data. I need to chunk it a lot. Yeah, yeah. So next slide. And so I kind of split this up into kind of three options of how we might move forward. One is the status quo, and that is, I think, what we kind of just discussed. We rely on the appeals process and the recall process and the NOMCOM to act as a counterbalance to these forces. And the ISG would remain in control of its internal processes. I think the downsides here are that, as I was talking about, there is a conflict between 2026 and the discussed criteria potentially. And as we just talked about, the appeals and recall processes are seldom exercised. And really, the heart of this, in some ways, for me, is that we select people, and the NOMCOM selects people based upon technical judgment. And if you see non-technical judgment, personal judgment being exercised, acknowledging that there is a continuum there, and sometimes it's very cloudy, which is being exercised, that creates the need for different selection criteria. If people are deciding, well, I'm going to discuss this, not because of the stuff we saw in 2026, but because, as Martin so helpfully pointed out, I don't like it. That has a very different characteristic, and I'd like to think about that. Next slide. Option 2, I think, is a middle path where we have some amount of agreement that we need more community consultation about how the ISG processes documents. And we make sure that there is agreement between the community and the ISG about how that's going to happen. And I think that would have the benefit that the internal processes, again, stay internal. But there are some practical issues there. Who instigates that process? Who makes sure that it is transparent and accountable? It may or may not provide the properties that I'm looking for, that legitimacy and due process. But as a middle path, this might be viable. I suspect that the further you go down this, the more it looks like a working group process, but maybe that's something to talk about.
Can I ask a quick clarification
Sure.
question? The slides talk about the internal processes, which are obviously much broader than the discussion.
Get closer to the mic.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry, don't adjust the mic while I'm using it. So clarification question is, so the slides talk about the internal processes of the ISG, which are much broader than the discussed criteria. So what is in scope here?
I'm talking specifically about the balloting procedures,
Okay,
including the
thank
discussed
you.
criteria.
Okay.
Sorry, that's just using a general
No,
term.
that's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah,
Okay, thanks.
I don't see a need to formalize everything. I think it's the reason why this is interesting is because it's effectively the interface with the work. That the major
Right.
interface.
No,
with the work.
that's why it was a clarification. I thought you were going to say that. I just want to make it clear. Thank you.
No, I'm not proposing that. Next slide. And the third option was the one that I think we talked about last time a little bit and a little bit on the mailing list, which is bringing those balloting processes into our process, creating a working group with that scope and saying, these are the input documents, let's talk about them, and publish them as process RFCs, whether that's updates to 2026 or how you want to couch that need to be discussed. And very explicitly, the output might be a character for character copy of the input. I would be perfectly happy personally if we just publish those documents as BCPs. I think that would be a great outcome.
So, can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Now I have to kiss the mic again. Okay. Martin Duke, Google. In your opinion, do you think the current discussed criteria are appealable based on this disconnect you see with 2026 under the status quo?
I don't believe they're appealable. No.
Okay.
How could they be?
I don't know what the answer is, but I mean, people yell about ISG statements all the time.
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion about their status.
Okay. I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, I would think that anything the ISG does that someone believes conflicts with an RC 2026 should be appealable. So like, I think if you had a problem with the discuss, like whatever I don't necessarily see the disconnect, but if you think there's a disconnect, I would encourage you to, right. Through the existing process to raise that with the IAB. Sure, please appeal us.
I agree that anything that conflicts with 2026 is appealable. I think that there's an impression in a large part of the community that the discussed criteria have are an elaboration of 2026, and therefore they're the primary reference.
You got one more slide, which I guess.
Yeah,
just says,
we're almost done. So then the fun begins.
So you have a queue.
Cool. Oh, is the 8? How many people are in the queue? Is
Yeah.
that what that means? Okay, cool. So the third option, yes, would we have a working group or a working group like structure? We've done this kind of with RSWG recently, which is maybe an interesting analogy, and make balloting in that process owned by the community. And as I said, if the output's a character for character copy of the input, that's great, but then it has the legitimacy that it's been through a community process and the community is in control. Change control effectively passes to the overall community. And as we all know, change control is important. I've talked to people about this offline and on the list, and the downsides that have been pointed out. There are lack of flexibility, that you lock this in an RFC and then you can't change it easily. True. It hasn't changed a lot, though, in the many years that it's been used. So that would suggest that it doesn't need to change a lot necessarily, at least not on very often. And I think you can always build into these sorts of instruments, if they're well stated, the flexibility to do what you need to do. Discretion with appropriate oversight, which is always a good pattern to have in governance. And others have pointed out that if we do this, we'll have more process RFCs. Well, we've already started walking down that road, haven't we? So I don't know what to say to that. Next slide. Yes, so here we are.
But as people go to the microphones, so I would personally like to hear whether we think there is a problem. So because a lot of your final slides were now on, what can we do about it?
Yeah, should I stay? I don't want to make me the focus of this, because I want this should be a community discussion. So I would like there to be hums at some point, but yeah.
I think you're gonna want to respond to what people have to comment on.
Throw your best arrows.
If you manage to be brief from up here, I think that would be helpful. Otherwise, you have to jump between the microphones all the time. It might be a little bit odd. But yeah, presentation is over now. This is a Q&A time. But so if you could, I would. So I was fascinated to hear that you did an analysis on discusses over the last couple of years and found issues that you think were violations of 2026. I would love to see more data on this. If that motivates this, right? We probably do have a problem. I'm personally not aware of any, and none were raised to me.
Let me qualify that a little bit. I did a quick analysis of discusses and abstains. I need to get better data. I need to go directly into the database. And violations of 2026, I'll put it this way for now. There were certainly things in there that raised my eyebrows quite high.
Okay. Anyway, but sort of understanding the nature of a problem and its existence, I think, is what I would like maybe focus the beginning of this discussion on and go from there. So with that, Barry.
This is Barry Lieba. I was guessed the 8, and I had 8 things to say, and now it's 9, so I guess I have 9 things to say. Now, I really think that this is addressing a problem that we don't have. I think if we're looking at the problem that people don't think things are appealable, we need to make some sort of awareness of the appeal process that goes beyond that. I think the IESG putting out the discuss criteria fixed a lot of problems. I would not like to have that codified in an RFC. And my sense is that what we've been doing is saying, put in your discuss, we'll have the discussion. If after that discussion we haven't resolved it, we can go say, hey, wait, this really doesn't meet the discuss criteria. You need to drop that. And that's generally been effective. We have 2 mechanisms to kill a discuss that an AD won't remove, and neither of them have been necessary to be used. Yes, there are some times when someone digs their heels in and we have issues. My sense is that that's generally been resolved internally, and having something in an RFC wouldn't help. An appeal would still be necessary if we got to that point, and we just need to make more people aware that any decision the IESG makes is appealable. I'd prefer to go in that direction.
So if I could respond to that briefly,
You kind of just want to say, you don't have to respond to everything, and we have 30 minutes and 10 people in the queue.
I understand. I think probably I'll respond to a couple, because that'll flesh out things, and then we'll go from there. I think that there are some issues in this process that need to be teased out. There's a lot of culture built around it and subtle practices that are common knowledge in the IESG and completely opaque to the rest of the community unless they're ex-IESG. And as a result, it's a secret knowledge, and that's causing friction. So I'm, as I said, I think in some of the discussion, I'm not stuck on making these RFCs. That's one, to me, sensible path forward. What I want to do is to be able to give some feedback and have a discussion about the minutia of these and make them more clear. And the problem is that the only mechanism for doing that right now is to send email to iesg@iesg.org. And frankly, that's often a black hole. And the power imbalance there is quite striking in that if they choose to ignore it, it's ignored. And so I'd like it to be in some other form.
So I'll just add that last bit that you said, I agree with. Have the discussion raise awareness. Yeah.
Hi. So I think Lara said he would.
Sorry, can you speak up?
Oh, sure. I can also move the mic. I'm too short. Warren Kamari, Google. So Lara said that he would be surprised if there were a bunch of discussers that sort of violated 2026. And I wouldn't really be surprised because I think I do it all the time. The reason is we have a thing you can either ballot discuss or comments. And often people just don't read the comments. So I know I've put in a bunch of discussers of like, I think this document would be way better if you had an example. Clearly that's not really a 2026 position. It's also nothing that I'm actually trying to hold the document up on. It's merely a way to show this is a really important comment. And technically that violates 2026, but it's clear I'll remove it as long as somebody's read it. So careful when analyzing the bits, and maybe we should have comment, discuss, and like, you know, here are some nits.
Warren's discusses.
I'll say that so far from digging around, I'm more concerned about the abstains than the discusses.
Pete.
Oh, I'm sorry. I took
Oh,
myself
sorry,
out of queue before I got
No
here.
worries.
John Peterson, third person in a row wearing a hat.
You gotta
speak
get
up,
closer,
Warren?
to the mic. They turned them down.
I'm sorry,
a
yes.
lot.
Third person in a row wearing a hat because it was like Barry, and then Warren, and then myself. Yeah, so I mean, I just want to reiterate something Cullen said earlier. Having played some small part many, many years ago in the creation of the discuss criteria, the non-discuss criteria were probably the most important part, right? And, you know, I think poking at the 2026 language about this is probably right insofar as there should be some consensus about what the circumstances are in which we're allowed to block work in the IETF, right? And like, I think having something like a working group or some structure by which the community can agree broadly, these are the places in which we think work can be delayed, and these are the cases in which we think work can be effectively exiled, is something the community as a whole should decide, not like basically the ISG, you know, has this informal agreement that, you know, could be dispensed with tomorrow, right? Like the next ISG to come along to just say, new ISG statement, we're not doing that anymore. I think would be valuable.
Pete Resnick forgot his hat. There is a serious problem here. I have had discussions recently with senior members of the community who should know better, who say, well, there's this discuss on the document that's been on the document forever, and yeah, but I don't want to bother fighting the fight and making an appeal. The appeal is way underused. People over-discuss in the IESG constantly. I am shocked, Lars, that you think there is not a problem here, because it was a problem when I was on the ISG, and it's been a problem for as long as I can remember that people use discusses the way Warren uses them, which is inappropriate. People use abstains the way Mark is describing them that are inappropriate. It's always been there. I think they should be appealed, and if people were actually active about this, there would be appeals relatively constantly in the current state.
So you're saying there's, so we have an eminent problem with discusses and ballot positions that violate 2026?
I believe
Really?
so.
Okay.
I believe so. Certainly the ones Warren described are violations of 2026. Yeah. and shouldn't be used that way because they are exposed to the community as blocking positions. The community sees those discusses as blocking positions. Whether or not Warren intends them that way, that's how they're seen.
So,
and
correct.
that's a problem.
So the balloting process is fluid in the sense that the people ballot while we're discussing a document, right? And ballots change, right? So during formal telechat week, right, you might see things in the discuss, and you might see things like, I'm going to clear this on the ballot, or I want to make sure we talk about this on the telechat, and afterwards it's going to go away. So after that period, right, I would be interested to know what is actually remaining in the discuss pool, that or abstain pool, if you will.
I will go back to what Mark said earlier, and then I'll finish my comment. You are assuming things about knowledge in the community that only exists among current and former IESG members. And you are assuming things about how the community perceives behavior that is only available to former and current IESG members. That's a problem. And I don't think the IESG is sensitive enough to that issue. But finishing what I was going to say, I actually think that formalizing an RFC, the discuss criteria, is the wrong approach. I think we want to change the culture of challenging the IESG, making clear to the IESG what we as a community want out of their comments, out of their ballot positions, and make sure that the wrong things don't happen. And I don't disagree with Warren that there need to be mechanisms in the IESG to say things like, this is a really important comment, or this is a less important comment. It's that you need to expose these things to the community in a legitimate way. Some of that's a tooling issue, some of that's simply an education issue. But the current state of affairs is really pretty damaging, and damaging culturally to the way we deal with documents.
Just to respond briefly, I'd be fine with that outcome, Pete.
Ted Hardy, testing the mic. Recent appellant, so I feel like I've helped demonstrate to the community that appealing an ISG statement can work. So I know it was very tedious for you, Lars, but look, it did something better than you think. I also wanted to point out that as somebody who had a document held for more than a year under the regime prior to the existence of the discussed criteria, this was the document that eventually became RFC 3258.
Can you get closer to the mic still? I can't.
Okay, I was saying, as somebody who had a document held for more than a year after it was submitted to the ISG prior to the existence of the discussed criteria, and as John points out, specifically the discussed non-criteria, I think it's been an enormous step forward for where we were before. So in the interest of making monotonically increasing improvements, it was a huge improvement. I think the question we ought to be asking ourselves is, what's the next improvement? And I think there's low-hanging fruit here, as you can put at the bottom of the discussed criteria. If you see a discuss that does not meet these, it is appealable. Please see your friendly working group chair for how to go about that. If you don't already know, that would be a simple, monotonically improved thing to do. I don't think, however, that we need to do anything to change the source of legitimacy here. I think the core question that Mark is asking is, does this need to move to community change control in order to gain legitimacy? And I don't think that that's necessary. And I don't think it's necessary because this is part of the processing by which the ISG performs the function that they were appointed by the community. And my perception is, as a result, that the mechanisms by which they perform the function can be selected by the ISG, and that the mechanisms for selecting the ISG are the response when it is not an appeal. So I think we can continue to make improvements in how the discussed criteria are used. You might want to have little flags that indicate this is a discuss. This is a soon to be dropped discuss. This is a discuss because I couldn't find the comment button on my tiny screen. Whatever you want as little flags to help people as monotonically improved usages of the ballot procedures. But the core question of where does this derive legitimacy, I think, is from the role the ISG has, and I don't think it needs to shift. Thanks.
Still 10 people in the queue, 20 minutes left. I'm gonna start searching for the queue close button, so you have a little bit of time to get in queue, or not, who knows?
Mic check. Oh yeah, real close. David Skenazy, also not wearing a hat and explicitly speaking today as an individual contributor, not as a member of any board. To answer your question, Lars, yes, there is a real problem here. I have written a few RFCs over the past 8 years and have had them go through ISG review and had discusses. Yes, to Ted's point, the little disclaimer at the top of the discuss, hey, this is just a discuss, we're just here to chat, we're the ISG, we're nice, is helpful. It doesn't change the fact that a discuss could very well be named a veto. It is a blocking thing on the document. And
only if it remains. Right?
Only if it remains. And then I've had times where we had a technical conversation as co-authors with the discussing AD, and the discussing AD said, no, I disagree, and left their discuss. So what happens then? My general take on most technical things is I don't care. It really makes my life easier. But in this case, my co-author cared deeply. The AD seemed to care deeply. So what happens next? I keep hearing from the ISG, well, in that case, just appeal. I will remind everyone that that is not possible. Appeals are very clearly defined in 2026, and you appeal specific things. I can't appeal what flavor the cookies are. You appeal, for example, process failures, and specifically you appeal ISG decisions. The ISG decision to reject the document as a whole is appealable. A discuss that hasn't been cleared yet, as Lars just pointed out, is just a discussion that we're having. It is not appealable. And even if it were, then like I don't even know how this works. I've been doing this for 8 years. How can you expect newcomers to possibly do this? So all that to say, there's a real problem and we need to solve it. There are many ways to solve it. I think this is a particularly productive one. There might be others. But in terms of like getting a bunch of folks in a room, maybe calling it a BOF to figure this out, I think there is really a problem to be solved here.
So, quick clarification. So the problem in your definition is the ability for the ISG to block documents coming to it.
So, well, that's a whole other can of worms. In this case, I think the fact that discusses, like, so let's say this. The discuss was based on an AD's personal opinion, and they're like, this isn't great. I would like this bike shed to be this other color because I think that's technically better. That was in the roughly, if you squinted at them the right way, the discuss criteria say that's okay. So therefore, I'm stuck. So one potential solution is then to change the discuss criteria. But the problem I have is that the ISG can have a discuss that can block work indefinitely for reasons that aren't set forth in 2026.
So I think it illustrates that we do need to understand we do need to explain the process better, because I think what you explain is actually not possible. But I would like to move on and go through the rest of the queue, please.
Martin Duke, got a whole list of things, but I'll try to be brief. Okay, so first of all, the Warren discuss. I mean, I think Warren more than anyone has like acted to try to demystify this thing and like have dope panic text and like ISG statements and like wikis and blogs and whatnot. I certainly would be open as an ISG member. I would be open to any and all suggestions to like further demystify that process. That said, I think the new author problem is largely unsolvable. Like creating a new process RSC that nobody new reads is not like the only way to get new authors to understand their process is through mentorship. of like by chairs and shepherds and ADs, which I think we try to do, at least some of us. So like something we can do in gen area is not going to solve that problem. Okay, appealing discusses. I do think you can appeal I mean, if it discusses persistent for long, I'm of the opinion that you can appeal it. If anyone wants to write text for a ISG statement that like clarifies that, I am happy to carry it through the ISG in my time remaining. If somebody thinks we need to do an RFC, I would absolutely 100% support an RFC that like clarifies that through gen area. So please bring that if we feel that's necessary. Let's see. Okay, regarding your options, I do think we need to fix some balloting procedures. I think doing an RFC, I think RFCs are too heavyweight. I think some sort of community consultation would be great. I'm pretty comfortable with option. I'm comfortable with option 2. And my last comment is I was quite struck by your comment that you were actually worried about abstains, because we have very quickly gone into the discuss rat hole. And I feel like we need to have another discussion about abstain. We don't have time for now. And I'd be happy to do that with you offline.
I would love to talk about abstains. They are fascinating.
Yeah. Okay. So we can go there some other time. We don't have time today, unfortunately.
Luckily for you.
This is Murray. I'm not wearing a hat, but I am wearing a badge. To Pete's point about appeals, I have been holding a discuss for close to a year now. Both sides of that appeal have said, if you don't do something about, if one side said, if you do let this go, I will appeal it. The other side is saying, if you don't let this go, I'm going to appeal it. Would one of you please appeal it so that it's no longer on me? Second, you had a bullet up there that said NOMCOM selects on technical criteria. I just had my NOMCOM re-interview and they asked me almost no technical questions. It's much more of a personality test. Like, do you fit? And will you take the IETF in the direction we want it to go? So if this chips away at my discretion to use discusses by pulling away all there's one of the things you list all the criteria, but there's a sentence above it that says, this is not an exhaustive list of when you can use them. If that gets constrained further, then I am more restricted from being able to do my job, in my view, effectively. I become a robot to a list of 10 things I'm allowed to discuss stuff for, and I'm really concerned about that.
Well, and I think maybe that's, if we have agreement in the community about what your job is, I think everything would improve here. And some people think that it should be more mechanical and that you need to respect community consensus more. Others think that no, we need these heroes to stand up and make sure that the right thing happens. The truth is maybe somewhere in between, but I think we should have agreement on that.
That's fair. I think that I should have the ability to nudge things in a certain direction. That's why NOMCOM picks me over the others.
And maybe this is just about how much nudge.
Sure. What you just said made me feel more comfortable than everything that was said up to that point. So,
well, I'm glad to serve, Murray.
Colin.
So, Colin Jeggs, 2 things I want to comment on. First, we keep discussing appeals. I'd like to point out that Pete pointed out earlier, there's actually 2 mechanisms for clearing a discuss. The second one far less known than the other one. So the recall should be made. People should be aware that process is there as well.
No, there's a discuss clearing.
Oh,
procedure.
3 discuss. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, right.
No, tell me more.
Let me tell you more. And David. 2026 does not limit the recall process in any way, so feel free to use it. Next, on to more important things. Murray's begging you. Okay, I want to talk about the abstain position for a second, because I think that has caused a lot of grief as well at times, and clearly Mark has said that earlier. So I take a very functionalist approach to this. I think that the most important thing is we need to make it easy for ADs that have found themselves in a rough or uncomfortable position in the way that people get themselves there to be able to move forward as easily as possible and let the document get published. And that if that allows them, if that means having a place where people can say, I hate your baby and it's ugly, but I'm going to let you have it anyway. That's fine. I don't care. If that's the thing that's important to me is we make the internet better by getting the RFC out there. I could care less what's in the data tracker. Okay. And I think that's a really important reason, like we talked about, why there's these two types of abstains that are very different reasons and very blurred together. That's great. That's a feature, not a bug. We don't want to differentiate those two. We want to publish the document. So anything that allows us to publish the document in the abstain category and get past that is a good thing. And the engineering part of us wants to differentiate the flowcharts of these processes. No, this is not about an engineering flowchart. This is about humans, how they work, and what the easiest way is to allow somebody to step backwards from some perhaps bad position and get to a place where we can publish the document. And I'd like us to retain that aspect of an abstain. I'm sure it could be improved. We could get better ways to do it or something like that. But I do think that that the weirdness of all of that is a feature, not a bug when it comes to abstain. As long as you define your objective metric as my document gets published, not anything else. And I think that that's the right metric.
So I want to second that. So the escape valve function of the abstain is highly underrated and incredibly useful. There is a wrinkle here where sometimes we have documents that get so many abstains that they fail to have the required number of ballots to actually get published. So that is a deadlock state that we don't want to talk about here now because we don't have time. But exactly when is the last time that happened? I can't recall.
Well,
anyway,
look, I think 2026, let me comment on that. I think 2026 more or less requires there has to be some way the ISG can say no, right? And that is a special form of no. And it was carefully designed to make it, the balloting process, carefully designed to make no individual person can say no, and certain types of documents you can't say no. And we narrowed and sliced off in all kinds of ways, many of the ways that we'd had before. Like, I mean, you know, all those things in that discuss criteria, like the IOU discuss, like they're in there for a reason, okay? There was like, hey, I have a problem with your document, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. And 2 years later, I'm making up the 2 years number, but substantial amounts of time later, the IOU had not been delivered, right? Like it really did make things better. Like everything's in there because it was a behavior we had seen in the past. So
sure,
understand.
But we're not fighting that war anymore.
No, of course, yeah.
Hi, Colin Perkins, speaking as an individual and speaking as an individual who has declined the AD nomination many times. So we've been having a conversation that talks about two people, talks about the authors and the IESG. This is actually a three-party conversation. We have the authors, the working group chairs, and the IESG. I'm concerned that we are having that there seems to be this debate going on between the authors and the IESG, where the authors are getting stuck and the working group chairs are not stepping in and saying, hey, something is going wrong here. We should be having a broader conversation. And if we have working group chairs who are not willing to have that conversation with the IESG, then this is telling me something about the way we are appointing or training working group chairs that maybe we should be looking into rather than necessarily revising the discuss criteria.
I'd agree with that. I think it's about both the education, the working group chairs, and the power dynamic between them and the ADs.
Alexi, and I might reopen the queue if we're actually sticking to time.
Okay. I will try to be quick. There were various things covered before.
Can you speak up, Alexi?
Maybe a little point that you, when you did during your presentation, you said the ISG created discuss criteria. Well, ISG changes every year. When I saw the discuss criteria first time around 2009, I just looked at it and decided, okay, it's good enough. And even though the decision to codify it was done by different set of people, you know, and this group of people kind of grows over time because there are more area directors and XADs over time. So the other thing is discuss criteria hasn't changed really. So I tend to think that I disagree with people that we shouldn't codify it because I don't see any better process, and I think we should just write it down in RFC. As far as the whether we need to do this in a working group or not, maybe we should start by analyzing differences between 2026 criteria and discuss criteria as a first step. So that might be worth spending some time on, whether it's like design team or working group or both. I don't know.
Alyssa Cooper, I was also intrigued by your comment about abstains. Some of this ground has already been trod, but also, you know, Martin's was sort of like, oh, we can talk about that separately. I actually think these things are like very interconnected, so I would suggest not talking about them separately. My pet peeve about the abstain is that if you look in the dictionary about what it means to abstain, it means to not vote, to not take an action, and often people abstain, and then there continues to be further engagement with the abstainer, which is literally what you said. What you said is that you abstained, and yet like you get drawn in, and people are trying to convince you to change it and whatever, right? And so I think it's actually like quite a delicate matter, because I know that there's some discomfort with the content of what goes in abstains, and maybe there's something to be done about that. But it's as Colin said, a very valuable tool to not have to continue to engage with someone who objects to your document, and yet people don't treat it that way. It's like it could be really valuable, and it doesn't get treated that way. And there have been these cases where there were not enough ballot positions to get the document unblocked, and sometimes that's because of the number of abstains, and sometimes it's because the number of abstains plus no ballot. And maybe that's a blocking condition that we want to take another look at. But I think the abstain is seriously misunderstood and underutilized, and it could help relieve some of the pressure around discuss if that were fixed. The other thing that the whole not having enough ballots problem shows you is the lack of incentive for the IESG to work as a team, which is like a pervasive problem in the entire operation of the IESG. It is really not incentivized in any way to work as a team. And so when you get these dynamics with like one person holding out with their discuss or too many abstains, there's nothing that drives the IESG towards owning decisions collectively. And that's maybe a deeper problem, but it will surface if this conversation goes forward. Or it should, because just solving this for like individuals who are staking out their own claim is probably not the best way to solve it.
On the last point, we have data tracker functionality now that shows you as an AD on your dashboard whether there are documents that are missing ballots that you haven't balloted on, and it's trying to nudge you to do so.
Does it work?
It's too soon to tell. It's been a couple of weeks only, but we have it now.
It's been a couple of weeks only, during which time we had no IESG telechat. So.
It's working for some of us, is what I'm hearing.
Just to respond very briefly, thank you, Alyssa. That's incredibly insightful. I think that's, what are we designing this system for, and what outcomes do we want is the important question to be asking. So thank you. And to the point of a dashboard, there should maybe be a dashboard for the community too.
Yeah, Paul Wout is a freshman AD, I guess. So I'm fairly new to this process. So I haven't seen many long-term problems on discusses. If you look at the process of getting a discuss cleared, if it gets constrained to such a point where I don't really can discuss anymore, then you're just going to move the problem in an even less visible area, which is called AD follow-up. For instance, we now have a document that has like, I don't know, 300 hyperlinks in it. Some people think it's way too much and makes the document unreadable. I had a discuss on that, which would probably technically fail your discuss criteria. And I indeed changed it to a comment, and now it's with the responsible AD under AD follow-up. And now you've got like the AD has sort of said they will not do anything with this document until this issue has been solved, but it's not even marked anywhere that we're discussing this, which makes the problem even worse. So I think that the solution you're sort of proposing is actually going to make things worse, not better.
I think you misunderstand. I am not proposing that we necessarily constrain the ability of an AD to do something. What I'm interested in is making sure that there's alignment between leadership in the community and shared understanding about how and why an AD can treat a document in a certain way. And that's the important outcome here.
So we're at time. Thanks, this was useful. I hope you got feedback. I hope, I heard some agreement on doing some things, more specifically explaining what the current process is even better. And I also heard some people that were thinking there's tweaks to the current process or maybe changes that we can have. Those would then ideally lead to a BOF proposal or something like that, or at least another discussion like that on something that would be a concrete proposal. I see people in the queue that I'm not going to reopen, but while I have your attention, I'm a newly reconvening chair here, and I of course totally forgot that I need minutes of this. Right. So if anybody took some minutes out of the goodness of their heart and could send them to me, I appreciate you highly. Thank you very much. Otherwise, I would have gone through the recording and done it myself.
Sure.
But so.
That's
yeah, I know.
So I just
you
want to say
you want to read the transcript is what you're saying? No. Okay.
Lars?
Yes.
I would just want to thank Emily Heron, who took the notes for us.
Thank you, Emily. Yes.
Lars?
You're my hero. Yes.
Can I ask, what's the venue to continue this discussion?
So, do you mean a mailing list when you say venue? Yeah.
GitHub repo, I don't care.
GenArea, as far as I know, doesn't have a mailing list. So in
Gen Dispatch?
Gen Dispatch. It's not the greatest fit, but it's.
Or can we get a mailing list or what?
I'm sorry?
Should we create a mailing list or is it?
If you think that's
maybe
better,
soon?
you can. I'll happily give you one.
Maybe Gen Dispatch for now.
I think Gen Dispatch has an established audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
I was just asking about next steps, because if you're saying to file a BOF request, that's kind of already happened. So let's make sure that we have a path forward to keep this conversation going.
Right.
And one thing is certainly on the ISG, right? In order to look at the various statements we've put out and see if we can add clarifications to them. Keeping in mind that they have been like an appeal magnet lately, so not looking forward to trying that, but hopefully we can do better in this particular area if we're a bit more careful about what we put out. I think the community should actually, if I think there's some fundamental questions that were raised, like what is the role of the ISG? Should the ISG be able to block something indefinitely, or is the role of the ISG basically to check whether the community has done a reasonable job, but otherwise get out of the way, right? And I think 2026 is pretty clear what the ISG should do. And if there's a change in the community on that role of the ISG, I think we should be very clear about it, and we should actually talk about what does the community think the ISG should do.
Can I just ask that the ISG be very conscious that it's a gatekeeper function in this?
ISG is very conscious.
Right. And so if we do have a discussion and we do come up with another BOF proposal, if it's denied, the reasons will be better than the denial that we had before.
So to give you a bit more context personally from the BOF call, right? Your BOF proposal was very short. And it was so short that people that didn't follow the Gen Dispatch discussion had basically nothing to understand.
But that's not what, so this comes back to the appeals and everything else. That's not what your document said. Those weren't the reasons given.
So that I didn't put in there, but anyway, we're way over time.
Okay.
We can have another GenArea in Brisbane if you want to, but I would like to see, I mean, this was basically facilitating a discussion, which we've had now. I think it's on everybody to come up with, follow-on items that are more concrete and actionable to see if we can have discussion on those.
So Mark's penultimate comment was he's essentially trying to demystify the process. That you were going to, your goal is to get alignment to demystify the process. To the extent that does not change the process, or just to make sure people understand it, I'm happy to work with you to write something, either as an IG statement or as an internet draft that essentially encodes my understanding of the balloting. And we can, Warren, I'm sure would be in on it. We can do, so we can definitely write down better what we are doing. And I'm happy to work with you on that to make it clear.
I just wanted to thank everybody for what I thought was a pretty useful discussion and very much on point and not all over the place. So thank you.